Thank you very much. Thanks for your attendance. In my presentation, I will try to do three main things. The first one is to take the hints presented by Mr. Petrosino and Mr. Ferrecchi concerning the relations between airports and territory. That introduces to the concept of airport city that I will try in some ways to expand, also based on Gabo presentation. And then the third part makes an attempt to try to benchmark the territorial context involved in the airLED project to the airport city concept. So let's start from the first part. As we said, the relations between airports and territories are complex, are mutual, and have synergies. In some ways, let's say that airports boost territorial and economic development. Of course, they are gates for accessibility. They are important infrastructures. They represent a system of services to the territory. On the other hand, the airport's competitiveness strongly rely on the territory where they are placed and on the territorial and economic system they have around. So basically, we have the airline industry, the airport industry. Of course, these are core parts for the development of airport cities, but at the same time, these bodies, so airlines and airport management companies, must talk and interact with other factors which are part of the system. So on one hand, the technical market and economic developments, and on the other hand, on the institutional development, so on the policy part. Let's say that all these three elements contribute to the shaping of the airport city. On the other hand, being the relation mutual to the shaping of a metropolitan, local, and regional system, I would say in a global and local balance that concerns the industry, that concerns the policies and transport. Of course, for the industry, there's no need to say on how much the internationalization processes impact on our economic systems. On policies, it's also quite obvious when we think about the relations between local and regional policies and the European policies. Just to make an example, the issue of the 10T priorities and Connecting Europe facility, and transport itself, of course. Talking about airports, of course, we have an issue of accessibility from to the airport itself, and of course, an issue of international accessibility. Thus, we may say that we have a local dimension in terms of logistics, trade, finance, and business activities, which are, of course, rooted into the local and regional context, and an international dimension in terms of internationally networked business models for just-in-time production processes, and these two things should stay together. In particular, the challenges for, I would say, the policy part, but also for airports themselves, is to, let's say, merge the two dimensions and combine internal, let's say, and external economies of scale and scope through an increased accessibility to develop these local and global networks. That introduces to the concept to the airport city itself. Let's say that in some cases the airport city was planned since the beginning, but in most cases it was actually an ongoing process which started from the development of a site which introduced an increased travel demand, so a higher pressure on the transport infrastructures, which asked new infrastructures development and new services development, which improved accessibility, and of course then in a positive circle improved again the site development. Of course, this is a positive circle which anyway can have constraints which can block the circle, and this is a challenge of the airport city concept, which can be physical barriers, land use or property issues, slot restrictions, for example. And so the challenge for the airport city development is in some ways to merge, not much a trade-off between the two elements, but merge, let's say, constraints and potentials. The concept of airport city was much explored. Actually, there's a slight difference between the concept of airport city and the concept of aerotropolis. Actually, we may say that the airport city is a sort of commercial core centered on the airport, while aerotropolis has a wider territorial scope, bringing together also economic, industrial, service, and residential areas. The Aerotropolis concept was also in some ways scientifically mapped. These are Professor Casada's criteria. Of course, we're not going through the single ones, but the second two ones are quite important. Of course, there's an issue of aviation-linked business in this industry, but there's also an issue of policy side, as I mentioned in the very beginning, and also an issue of communication, so of official recognition of the existence of an airport city. These are some of the airport cities in the world, according to Casada's mapping. But let's focus on the European level. In this table, we have some of the European airports. We don't have the big hubs such as Paris, London, or Amsterdam, for example. We have also pinpointed the airports involved in the project for Emilia-Romagna for the purposes, just for the purposes of this presentation. We have focused on Bologna, talking about airport city, notwithstanding the fact that all the project documents produced in the project, of course, concern a regional policy on the issue. Budapest, I must say, that is the only airport of the 4 airports which is already mapped as a candidate airport city within the official, let's say, Casada documents. One point, of course, concerns the dimension of the airports in terms of passengers traffic. So actually, they're, let's say, quite low compared to other airport cities mapped by Casada. So one question to which I don't want to give an answer concerns the fact that regional airports are, let's say, enough to be engines of an aerotropolis. So is there a dimensional issue? That's quite a complex topic which probably should be further explored during the project itself. The airport city concept, of course, is a positive concept, but has itself threats and limits. As I said in the beginning, there may be some environmental constraints due basically to traffic and increasing traffics. There may be a lack of special or even of economic resources to boost this development, especially in this period. And another element is that of governance. So sometimes we may have conflicting interests between public and private, but also within public and within private. These are the 4 territorial contexts involved in the project, and so I will try this effort, let's say, of benchmark to the airport concept. As Gabo said in the very beginning, actually, this is done basically according to 3 core pillars: accessibility, spatial, land use and environment, and business and investment. Based on which each partner made a status quo analysis with reference to the 3 pillars, and this is feeding, actually, the project process presented by Gabor. We also given a sort of grading to the positioning of the different airports compared to the airport city concept. Of course, this is a known judgment and evaluation of ITL and not, of course, an official position. But I must also add that the being red or being dark green doesn't mean in any means that there is a willingness, an opportunity, or a must to develop an airport. So a first snapshot. There are, let's say, for all airports, interesting and solid plans for future developments. Budapest has a project to develop into an airport city with a development plan for accessibility, for Terminal 2, for commercial areas. The project seems to call for, let's say, stakeholders' governance and cooperation towards this common objective. For modeling, it's a recently opened airport to civil traffic. It has a 2 stages enhancement project. In some ways, it's a regional airport, which is complementary to Chopin Airport. For Bologna, there is a master plan, of course, to enhance infrastructures, and a plan, of course, concerning both the accessibility, the new terminal, the aircraft base, and the new cargo area, with the positive collaborations of the local stakeholders involved. And for Ljubljana, there is also a project to develop into an airport city. there is in some ways an asymmetry between the land and air side of the airport, being the air side, let's say, more developed, and also, as in the case of Budapest, for the core for a need of cooperation. Concerning land use and environment, I will not enter into the single data of the single airports because that would be probably too boring. Let's say, evaluation we made probably says that Ljubljana has less issues with reference to land use and environment. And all the airports involved are, let's say, in some ways living the critical issues of an airport city. That is to say, noise issues. For example, Bologna, the growth of the airport brings noise externalities for which actions are ongoing, and that's, for example, a topic. The presence of protected areas, such as in the case of modeling, and basically involving and characterizing all the airports, probably less, but Ljubljana, there's an issue of land property fragmentation. The second pillar is that of accessibility, as I said in the very beginning, from the land and air sides. In these cases, probably the challenges, let's say, that the project airports are living are concerned, of course, to the accessibility at local level. Of course, all airports have willing and a plan to improve the accessibility to from the territories in which they are located. But there is also an issue of on air side in some ways, because of course air traffics have an impact, as I said in the beginning, in the development of the airport itself, of course. So probably one evaluation concerns the fact that relying only on weak national carriers or only on volatile low-cost carriers can be a risk. Well, I must say that up to my experiences, actually, that concerns not just airports. I mean, we've seen many transport nodes for which diversifying the presence of operators has been a critical success factor. And I think Bologna, in this case, is a best practice. Concerning business and investment development, all the airports have sound economic, business and service activities placed in the surroundings. Of course, I would say at different intensities in some ways. Probably the airport city concept calls for an issue of proximity of the economic and service activities to the airport. But if we talk about cargo, that's not just an issue of proximity, because of course the airport can be a gateway for the industrial system, not just of the city, but of the whole region. This last slide tends to, let's say, summarize the snapshot in terms of infrastructures, traffic, national rank. We have very different situations for the four airports. Closeness to city, presence of TEN-T networks, demographic trends, and land ownership. As I said, the last row is not an evaluation. It's just probably the distance as of today from the airport city concept, which is, of course, is a stimulus for future developments, and which is not, let's say, an element which judges the opportunity and potentials of airports to develop. Some very quick conclusions. Of course, as I said, very different contexts, and that's probably one of the reasons why the project was financed by the European Commission. All partners and the whole process of cooperation activated by airLED actually is much felt by all the stakeholders and partners involved. I think that the work carried out till now and the documents submitted by partners have shown a clear awareness of the need to match airports developments and territorial enhancements, based also on an awareness of the mutual, to say that again, impact between territory and airports at different levels in terms of direct impacts. So probably in terms of on-site and related to airlines, managing companies, handling operators, but also on-site commercial activities. Indirect and induced in terms of off-site serving the airport, but also in terms of sectorial interdependencies and multiplying effects of the airport, and in terms also of dynamic. So let's say scientifically in terms of magnetic capacity of airports to influence localization processes and decisions of businesses. And of course the sum of the previous ones in terms of global impact of airports. I will not enter into the definitions of the different type of impacts because of course that will require probably a project itself. So this was a hint for the proceedings of the project itself, and I thank you very much for the attention.